I'm Mark Golub, and in the news, continued concerns growing out of the tragic murders committed by a Floridian man at a gay nightclub in Orlando, Florida on June 12th. As I'm sure you know, a terrorist pledging allegiance to ISIS and ISIS founder al-Baghdadi attacked patrons at the nightclub Pulse, murdering 49, wounding 53. One of the issues that's been raised as a result of the murders is enhanced gun control in America, though thus far Congress seems unmoved and has voted down gun control legislation that would strengthen the laws regarding background checks, waiting periods, and how and who may purchase guns in our country. And the tragedy has also heightened awareness of the problems confronting the gay community, gay bashing, gay hatred, and the murder of gay men and women at times for all of the enlightenment throughout America. And with the laws to protect gays and same-sex marriage, the gay community in our country still rails against anti-gay sentiment, at times gay bashing and violence, and even murder of people in the gay community. It is clear that the terrorist murderer was out to kill Americans, to take part in the jihadist goal of reestablishing a Muslim caliphate and converting or destroying the rest of Western civilization. But it also seems clear that he chose a gay bar in which to inflict pain and death and sorrow. Well, the ripples from this tragedy are being felt throughout the gay community in America, including the Jewish gay community. And here to give us some insight in how American Jewish gays have been dealing with this crisis, I'm pleased to have on our JBS phones from New York City, Mordechai Levovitz, Executive Director of JQY, which stands for Jewish Queer Youth, a Jewish nonprofit organization that supports the LGBT community of lesbians, gays, bisexuals, and transgender individuals and families in the Orthodox Jewish community. Mordechai, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Mordechai, I've got a picture up here on the screen of you. It's a gorgeous picture of you at the Western Wall. You know which picture I'm talking about?
I'm not sure, but hopefully it's a nice one.
It's gorgeous. I was just wondering when it was taken, when you were last at the Western Wall.
I was last at the Kosel Hamaravi in about 2 weeks ago, 2.5 weeks ago. Just there.
Are you there often?
And I'm not there often enough, but in the last few years, I was lucky enough to go there about once or twice a year. There are a few programs that bring LGBT Jewish youth to Israel to see it through both a Jewish and LGBT perspective. And I was a madrich on 2 LGBT birthright trips, and I went on a Wider Bridge trip, which is for adults, and another organization that brings LGBT adults to Israel. And then just recently I went on a JFNY, the Jewish Federation of the JFNA, the Jewish Federation of North America, took LGBTQ leaders to Israel for about 9 days.
Well, that's wonderful.
So thank God, there's a lot of intersection between feeling like you're a minority and feeling like you're attacked in Israel, and you're certainly surrounded by people who have a certain animosity towards you just because we're Jews, to feeling with you're gay and lesbians. Unfortunately, sometimes people have a lot of animosity towards you.
Yes. By the way, I'm going to assume you personally are part of the LGBT community.
Yes.
Okay.
I am part of the LGBTQ community.
Okay. And your organization, JQY, stands for Jewish Queer Youth. It's initials that surprise me because, I grew up where queer was a real it was not a nice way to describe people who are homosexual,
Right,
and we were
it was
taught
an
not to
epithet.
use it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So
it was an
why
epithet,
has it
absolutely.
been chosen?
I think the reason why it's been chosen, and it's been chosen mostly by the youth today, who many of them did not have that same experience of growing up where queer was an epithet, because we're trying to be as inclusive as possible. And if you sometimes you just said LGBT, sometimes people say LGBTQ, sometimes people say LGBTQAAI.
Yes.
And it becomes an alphabet soup and very difficult to understand who's included and who's excluded. So the youth, the kids, they wanted a word that could just be an umbrella term that it can include everyone who wants to feel included. So they chose the word queer because, yes, it was once a word that was used to bash us. They wanted to reclaim it, and they thought there was a strength in reclaiming it. And then having a word, so it doesn't have to be an alphabet soup, that everyone who feels not in what's considered the majority heterosexual cisgender norm, anybody who's outside of it could be considered queer and feel welcome.
Very interesting. All right, very interesting explanation. Thank you for that. And tell us just a little bit about your own background in terms of growing up in the Jewish world and the fact that you're now with an Orthodox group, or a group that really is concerned with the well-being of Orthodox Jews. Are you Orthodox yourself?
I grew up in a very yeshivish family, a black hat family. My father is Smicha, and my mother grew up in Borough Park. I went to yeshiva all my life and enjoyed it very much, for what it's worth. And certainly the community that I identify with. Whether you get into denominational politics, what is Orthodox, what's not Orthodox, and all the craziness that goes on in what's in a name or politically, that I'm not interested in. That's not very important to me. So I try to get out of those conversations. But certainly when I come home, and the way I, would celebrate a Shabbos, the way I would celebrate Yom Tov, is the way my family celebrates Shabbos and Yom Tov, and that is, call it what you want. For me, that's Jewish. I mean, that's the only Jewish I know. Mm-hmm. So, and it's very beautiful. And I'm part of a Masorah.
Okay. Just recently, it was this past week, Fareed Zakaria pointed out on CNN, while the Quran is violently opposed to gay behavior, the Jewish Bible, Jewish tradition, Jewish law also defines male homosexual behavior as a capital crime. How have you experienced that in terms of your own Orthodox family, the Orthodox community you grew up in, and in general, how do the people you work with interface with Orthodoxy in the Jewish world?
I think it depends. I mean, if you want to ask me personally, right, I think every thinking Jew who learns the Torah and is still a part of this world struggles with the idea that the Torah seems to sanction slavery. The Torah seems to sanction a father selling his 12-year-old girl into slavery or into a marriage at 12. The Torah seems to sanction killing a rebellious child. The Torah sanctions a lot of things that are very uncomfortable with today's morale. Right? We can stretch it and say, okay, it doesn't really mean to kill Amalek, but that's what we read, right? We read genocide as part of our tradition. So every thinking Orthodox Jew and halachic Jew from Hashkafa deals with a conflict of their sense of ethics, right? Nobody ethically, even the frillest of rabbeim, believes that a man should be able to divorce a woman, but a woman should be trapped if she wants to get out of marriage. No Orthodox man with a heart believes that should be the ethics. But we are committed to a Torah that we don't understand. So this is nothing new. This is not I think for any Orthodox Jew who engages in the religion, we live every day with struggling with our commitment to a God and to a law that we don't understand, but an ethic that we should and have to believe in, right? Jews have been the people who stood up against slavery, who stood up for civil rights, who stood up for the poor. And now we see us standing for women. So we live in a very interesting dialectic, and for me, my Masorah, my Rabbeim, have defined that dialectic with a name, Yisrael. Yisrael is the name of a person who struggles every day with a God that he cannot understand. And that, for me at least, and I was lucky enough to have Rabbeim throughout my life who always explained Yiddishkeit like that. So for me, it was nothing new. I mean, it made a lot of sense the way that society itself cannot very easily be reconciled with a Torah that doesn't really make sense. That being said, the basic values of kindness, commitment, modesty, trying to not be promiscuous, those ideas are still something that we can take and we should imbue within both LGBT community and certainly in the Orthodox community in reflection to its LGBT members. We need to make sure our kids are healthy. We need to make sure our kids are happy. We need to make sure our kids have self-esteem. Those things have always been able to be focused on and worked on, even within the most Orthodox, the most Hasidish, the most Haredi circles. Those are still values. So I personally don't see anything particularly different about the struggle to be nice and kind and good to LGBTQ children. It's no different than it is to be nice and kind to our daughters, or be nice and kind to anyone who may not fit a mold that that the Torah necessarily puts on a pedestal.
It is lovely listening to you. I really would like at one point to get you into the studio when we could sit on a L'chaim program for an hour and really get into this more. You're very thoughtful. I have a lot of questions about what you said, but this is not the arena for me to ask those questions. You've described how you've encountered in your own journey. Would you say how you have expressed it is what most of the members you deal with through JQY, they have the same orientation? Have any of them ever come to you and said they are really hurt by the way in which the formal Jewish community has treated them because they are gay?
So now you're asking a very different question that even reflects a different answer for me. The first time you answered, how do I reconcile a Jewish hashkafa with Jewish halacha with my sexuality or my life? The next question is how I reconcile a community that unfortunately does not treat its LGBTQ members in a, excuse the term, nice way. The levels of rejection. And when I talk about rejection, I'm talking about rejecting 14 and 15-year-olds, sometimes even 11 and 12-year-olds. Terrible rejection. I mean, just yesterday I was dealing with a kid kicked out of yeshiva. He was 14. Mm-hmm. And this is a modern Orthodox yeshiva. Mm-hmm. So there is for what? For being gay. So there is a level of cruelty to children who are already suffering from insecurity and lack of self-worth. And to have the authorities, one, try to affirm and validate the cruelty, and two, not create any support resources or lifelines for all these kids who are already suffering, that is such an anathema to Jewish values and to the Jewish idea of tzedakah, or taking care of the people who need help, who are suffering the most, that's very hard for me to reconcile. And the level of rejection and the level of hurt and the level of need in the Orthodox community is like it was described in the article that you referenced. It is an emergency. It may be a quiet emergency, but it is an emergency nonetheless.
You know, you say it so beautifully. Are you ever tempted, are other members of your community ever tempted to move out of Orthodoxy? And you said before, labels don't mean that much, but the reality is that the different movements of Judaism have a very different approach to gay Jewish life. Are you ever tempted, are the people you work with ever tempted to leave Orthodoxy for other streams of Judaism that would be much more embracing?
Well, I want to be completely honest about the answer to this, right? Thank God, we're actually not the only organization that deals with Orthodox LGBT people. What makes JQY different and unique is that we are primarily worried about self-esteem, well-being, and health, which means that we understand if a 16 or 17 or 18-year-old needs or to leave Orthodoxy to feel safe and healthy, we will support whatever makes that kid safe and healthy. If a kid needs to stay and wants to learn to reconcile, we will support that. So because we are dealing with a level of risk that really is life-threatening, the last thing that JQY is particularly interested in, whether a kid stays Orthodox, doesn't stay Orthodox, Shomer Shabbos, not Shomer Shabbos, we want the kid just to get through adolescence and being young, healthy enough so that when he or she is an adult, they can make those kind of decisions with a much clearer mind. Mm-hmm. We're not a Kiev organization. We're not even a religious organization. Mm-hmm. We are culturally competent enough that all of us come from Orthodox backgrounds, so we know the language. We know the types of issues that these kids face, and our goal is to make sure that they are healthy enough to be able to get through the most at-risk periods, so that when they are healthy enough, they can make those theological or communal decisions later on. And that's our commitment. But
Good.
Yes, many of them do choose to leave Orthodoxy.
All right.
And for them, it may be the best decision. I think the people who lose out are the Orthodox community, because we are losing some of our best kids.
Look, I think you say it wonderfully. I hope everybody hears you. Your approach, I think, is just spot on. So, mazal tov. All right, let me ask you now the question that I told you I wanted to talk to you about. We had this these murders. It was murders by one individual, but 49 people were killed. A gay bar, Pulse, in Orlando seems to have been chosen because it was gay. I want to know what ripple effects have had on the people you deal with, the young people you deal with. In general, how has the Orthodox Jewish community responded to this event?
Well, I think there are two questions you're asking. One is that how has this particular event affected LGBTQ Jews,
yes.
especially young Jews?
Yes.
And I will say that when something like this happens, when you feel that your community is threatened, and especially now we look at it, Orthodox culture we don't have a bar culture, so it's very hard to kind of understand what a bar means to a group of people who have no place else to be themselves, because we don't go to a bar for that. That's not really part of our zeitgeist. But if we can look outside of ourselves for a second and understand that for these kids, this was a Latin night. Most of these kids came from conservative, Latino, mostly Catholic families. Many of them were closeted. Many of them came from families that did not accept them. They would go to this night in the club to have their safety, their time where they can be together and they could actually dance together and say, you know what, I can celebrate myself. So that's what was attacked for them, their sanctuary, their safe space. And for the Latin queer community in Orlando, most of who all knew each other, the kind of ripple effect is so... you can't. I mean, the only thing I can compare it to is if God forbid there was a terrorist attack in a small town in Israel where everybody really knew each other, and it really, really has a very hard effect, and everyone's mourning. For LGBTQ kids in the Orthodox community, if you don't have a place in which you can mourn together with people, in which you can say, oh, you tell people, this affects me, this makes me scared, this makes me afraid, this makes me sad. If you don't have people to tell, then that sadness goes to a very deep and almost unhealthy and critical and crisis place. That's why after this attack, we have a crisis hotline, and we had more crisis calls, about 3 times more than usual, because the kids who are closeted didn't have anywhere or anyone to speak to about their fear and about their sense of being alone and not being safe. So much like any natural disaster, the people who usually suffer the most are the people who are most vulnerable in general. The poor people, the people in the... So the same thing is true here. When something happens like this to the LGBT community, the people who are better off are the people who are out, who have support systems, but the people who are closeted suffer even more. So, I mean, I come from New York, and in New York City, according to the UJA Federation study that was in 2012, they found that 74% of youth in New York City are now in Orthodox families. I mean, 74% of kids, of Jewish kids, are Orthodox, which basically means that if you're a Jewish kid in New York, you're probably Orthodox or come from an Orthodox family. So you're talking about the numbers of LGBTQ kids in Orthodox families who don't have safe spaces, who feel that they need to be quiet, they need to live lives, they need to be silent, and then have to experience tragedies like this. It's almost unthinkable, and it should bother every Jew, whether you are Orthodox, Reform, conservative, unaffiliated, or even Hasidic and Haredi. It should tug on that heartstring of Jewish sympathy that we need. That these are Jews that need our help.
Again, beautifully said, Mordechai. What I didn't hear you speak to, and I'd love you to, did it make people involved with JQY or people you've talked to frightened for their own safety, whether it's in New York or some other place around the country?
Yes, there was a feeling. So we had we were supposed to have this past Thursday a party for the teens at our drop-in center, an end-of-the-year party, in which there would be music, it would be pizza, it would be a fun type of end-of-the-year kind of party. And because of what happened, the teens themselves decided that they were going to donate half of the time for the party to do a memorial and to speak about their feelings and to read poetry and to really kind of respect those who are who lost. And what was surprising was how many emails we got asking about the security at our drop-in center.
Yes.
They were afraid. They were nervous. They were like, well, will there be extra security? So there was a sense that, hey, if this can happen in a club in Orlando, this could certainly happen in a shul in New York, and this really could happen anywhere. And this is not only scary for LGBTQ people. I mean, as a Jew in New York, I mean, you have to. If you wear a yarmulke in New York, you're a target. I mean, I feel that's just a very sad state of affairs, but undeniable. Sometimes this is a crazy world after 9/11, and we can never be. We shouldn't allow ourselves not to be able to enjoy and not to be able to have a sense of menucha. But at the same time, we can't live in denial that the world is a very dangerous world.
At the moment, when you talk about being frightened and where the gay community meets, where JQY meets, by the way, my understanding is, Mordechai, you're housed in part at Congregation Bet Simchat Torah in New York. You also have a chapter at the JCC of Manhattan. Is that correct?
So we have our drop-in center for ages 13 to 23. That's the ages that for our drop-in center. So that we rent space, and CBST is the largest LGBT synagogue. It's a non-denominational synagogue, and now is a community center. They bought this beautiful building on 30th Street. So they just did this year, and we were able to rent some really beautiful space downstairs for our drop-in center needs.
Good.
We also have been meeting out of the JCC Manhattan for the last 10 years, and also for the last 4 years, we've been doing meetings at the JCC 5 towns. So, it takes a village. There's certainly LGBT kids in that. And hopefully there will be more and more JCCs and hopefully Orthodox synagogues that will open up their doors so that these kids can realize that they have a home and they're welcome in every community.
Just take 1 minute. This is a question that goes beyond your specific work with JQY, but all America now is concerned with radical Islamic terrorism and jihad. From your perspective, do you feel enough is being done by our administration, by our community, to in essence, engage and respect the fact that we're at war with a small but real faction of Islam? And that is the Jewish community also aware of it? And, where do you stand on that entire controversy?
Well, I think the Jewish community feels it a different way because we have been the target for a very long time. Certainly in this past century, we've been the target of fundamentalist Islam. Right? Certainly, I mean, you don't have to go too far back in Paris. There's a reason why they went into a kosher grocery and shot up.
Absolutely.
So we have it. Unfortunately, we feel it in a visceral way that maybe if you're not Jewish, it may take a little longer to come by.
Yes.
But like I said, after 9/11 and after San Bernardino, and we are all feeling that there is a problem. But this problem is extremely complicated, right? Because we are
Absolutely.
Jews are 0.2% of the 0.02, I think, 0.02% of the population. Right? Very, very few Jews in this world. 12 million. And how many millions and millions and millions of Muslims are there? So there are so many different kinds of Muslims, different kinds of Islam, different kind of countries that are Muslims. See, it's a very hard to compare religions and sociologies. But the issue here is fundamentalism. The issue here is a culture that never went through the Renaissance. We were lucky enough, Jews in Europe, we went through the Renaissance with European Gentiles, which changed the way we understand religion from a fundamentalist understanding to an enlightened understanding. That has affected European culture and then American culture. That hasn't happened in the Islamic world, and therefore, in some ways, they're playing catch-up. That doesn't mean that their religions are any essentially different. I mean, like I said before, there are terrible things that we don't understand in the Chumash, the Old Testament, the Quran, and the New Testament. So a lot of things that, if taken literally, could be very scary. How to do that? How to address fundamentalism in the Muslim world? That's the $2 million question. I think it has to come from within.
All right.
I don't know. I wish I knew. That's beyond my pay grade.
No, you did very, very well.
That's probably a harder question than dealing with Orthodox LGBTQ.
Okay. Mordechai, how old are you?
I'm 37.
Where are your parents?
My parents live in Lawrence, New York.
I hope they're proud of you. If you were my son, I'd be very proud of you, Mordechai. You're doing
thank you.
You're doing fabulous work. It's been a pleasure meeting you, through in the news, but you've got to come sit with me on L'chaim. In the meantime, you continue to do the work you're doing and the leadership you're giving, and from time to time, you and I have conversations on various issues. But it's been a joy meeting you, Mordechai. Thank you for the time.
Thank you. It means a lot. And it would be my pleasure to come and sit down with you.
Thank you, my friend.
Very good.
Okay.
Right.
The thoughts of Mordechai Levovitz, Executive Director of JQY, Jewish Queer Youth. As always, my thanks to our director, Sloan Copeland, production coordinator, Serge Goldberg, editor, Dennis Golan, JBS Associate Director, Dara Golub, and to the producer of In the News, Carol Lilienthal. Until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. Be well, my friends.